Pins are common at the amateur level, and many players struggle against them, often losing badly. I studied Garry Kasparov's games and found he followed a consistent winning plan against pins. I'll share that strategy with you now. Kasparov, playing white, faces Sunil Matubik. Let's dive in. Pawn to a4, pawn to a5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5. This is the Italian game, one of the most common openings at the amateur level. Let's see how Garry Kasparov plays it. Instead of knight to c3, he plays pawn to c3, considering how black developed the knight. I highly recommend this approach. You don't have to push pawn to d4 and enter complications if you prefer a calmer game. Kasparov himself, after knight to f6, simply played pawn to d3. The advantage of having this pawn here is that you never have to worry about your opponent jumping with their knight to d4. Additionally, later in the game, you may want to play pawn to d4 to attack the bishop and pawn. Pawn to c3 provides flexibility and makes your position safer. Now, black plays pawn to d6. Garry Kasparov responds with bishop to b3, a prophylactic move. If black attacks the bishop, white can retreat it to c2. It's also an awaiting move. As white delays castling intentionally, we'll see why soon. Black plays bishop to g4, creating a pin, a tactic many amateur opponents love to use. Garry Kasparov first played pawn to h3, which I highly recommend. Whenever your opponent plays bishop to g4, counter it with pawn to h3. It's the correct move in 99% of cases. This forces the opponent's bishop to decide whether to retreat or capture, giving you clarity. In most cases, they retreat to h5, maintaining the pin, which is what black did here. The advantage of having this pawn is that you now have the additional resource of pushing pawn to g4 if needed. Kasparov then played knight to d2, delaying development for a reason. He has a plan in mind. Let's see how he executes it. One interesting thing to notice is that white's position is already completely safe, and the pin doesn't bother white at all. Black has no real way to increase pressure. He can't jump a knight to d4, and the knight on d2 is already supporting its pinned counterpart. If needed, white could simply move the queen away, but there's no urgency. Black plays pawn to h6, and Garry Kasparov responds with knight to f1, revealing his plan. He intends to reposition the knight from d2 to g3. It's a long maneuver, but worthwhile. Once on g3, the knight will target the bishop on h5 and aim for the strong f5 square, supporting white's middle game attack against black's king. Now black castles. In this position, white has two common attacking plans, one aggressive and one slower, but both effective. The most aggressive option is pawn to g4, launching a fast and powerful attack against black's kingside. The bishop on g4 actually helps white by giving extra tempo for the attack, making pawn to g4 a great choice. This is what happened in the game, and we'll discuss it in a moment. The slower, safer option is simply moving the knight to g3. This avoids risks while still improving white's position. You can choose this approach if you prefer a more controlled game. This is also a perfectly fine option. You attack the bishop, forcing it to retreat. After the bishop moves, you can castle and later bring your other knight to h4, attacking the bishop. Since the pawn on g6 is pinned, knight takes e6 becomes a real threat. Black won't be able to recapture. The bishop will have to retreat, allowing you to reposition your knight to f5. You can also bring your queen to h3, and suddenly many of your pieces are targeting black's kingside, setting up a strong attack with simple moves. But let's return to Garry Kasparov's more aggressive approach. He boldly played pawn to g4. After the bishop retreated to g6, Kasparov continued with knight to g3. With the pawn on g4, white gains strong attacking possibilities. One option is pushing pawn to g5, aiming to break open black's kingside and activate the bishop. Another key idea is reinforcing control over f5, allowing white's knight to land there and create attacking threats. In the game, black played rook to e8, centralizing the rook. At this point, white had two strong options, either advancing pawn to g5 for an immediate attack or playing knight to f5 to increase pressure. Kasparov chose the most aggressive move, pawn to g5, to open up black's defenses. If black had captured with pawn takes g5, which didn't happen, white could recapture with the knight or another piece, both leading to a strong attack. Kasparov's approach ensured that he kept the initiative and put black on the defensive. After bishop to g5, white has opened up a file against black's kingside, creating the opportunity to continue pushing the h-pawn forward. By attacking the bishop, white gains additional tempo and continues to build a simple yet effective attacking plan on the kingside. Black, on the other hand, has very few options to counter or defend. This is the strength of Kasparov's approach. By creating threats and using tempo, he forces black into a passive position. However, let's go back to the game. Black chose not to capture the pawn and instead attempted a counterattack with knight to h5. Kasparov remained unfazed and played knight to h4, completely ignoring black's pawn move. Now with the knight on h4, white threatens knight captures on g6, and we know that the pawn on g6 is pinned thanks to white's bishop. This creates immense pressure on black, forcing them into a very difficult position. Since the pawn on g6 is pinned, black cannot recapture, meaning knight takes g6 will result in winning a piece for white without any compensation. Black is forced to deal with this threat. In the game, black responded by capturing on g3, then attempted to address the situation by moving the king to h7. While this defends the bishop, it doesn't solve the underlying problems. After white captures the pawn on h6, black's pawn structure on the kingside is completely shattered. What's more, white's bishop, which started on a less active square, is now incredibly powerful, targeting key points in black's position. With black's kingside crumbling, Kasparov followed up by playing rook to f1, bringing the rook into the attack. This not only strengthens white's position, but also applies pressure on black's weakened a7 pawn. Black responded with rook to f8, trying to stabilize the situation, but it was already too late. White's attack had gained significant momentum, and black's defenses were falling apart. Kasparov then added more fuel to the fire of his attack with the move queen to g4. Now, the queen is in close proximity to black's king, creating significant threats. In some variations, white's bishop could also be hanging, adding to the pressure. Black responded with queen to c8, attempting to offer an exchange of queens, likely to alleviate some of the attacking pressure. However, white had no interest in simplifying the position. Kasparov wanted to keep up the attack and deliver checkmate, so he placed his knight on f5, a key idea in all these attacking positions. Having a knight on f5 is a game changer. It amplifies the strength of the attack exponentially, making the position much more dangerous for black. Always aim to get your knight to f5 if you can in these types of attacks. Black, recognizing the threat, traded queens. Kasparov then placed his rook on f5, intensifying the pressure. The pawn on f7 became a significant weakness, and black's king was now exposed. Black tried to counterattack with knight to e7, targeting the rook, but Kasparov simply ignored it and continued with his plan. He launched a direct attack on the king with queen to h5, capturing the rook without any hesitation. This didn't change the situation at all. The threat of queen to h6 was looming, and black had no way to defend. Black played queen to d8, but Kasparov followed up with queen to h6, delivering a check. The black king was forced to retreat, and after pawn to f6, black resigned because queen to g7 was coming, and there was no way to stop it. This attack is a perfect example of Kasparov's strategic brilliance. It may seem simple if you know the plan, but it's a strategy that Kasparov executed flawlessly against many opponents with an incredibly high success rate. He always won. That's it for today's analysis. I hope you found Kasparov's attacking plan helpful and insightful. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chess tips. Thanks for watching.